morning and welcome to this episode of Monday Morning Detective. My name is Gino Scala, and today's episode number 2, we're going to talk about a crime that occurred out in Des Moines, Iowa in June of 2020. June of 2020. A 15-year-old girl had run away from an abusive stepmother and was taking up residence in the hallway of an apartment building. One of the residents of this apartment complex, by the name of Christopher Brown, took in the runaway girl and proceeded to rape her regularly and held her against her will. He also began pimping her out. So one of the customers, these days they call this human trafficking, when you quote unquote sell, in this case a woman or a girl, for sex in return for money, favors, drugs, etc. So this Christopher Brown pimps out the girl, a 15-year-old girl, to a neighbor, a 37-year-old named Zachary Brooks. Now, Zachary raped her repeatedly over a week's time. And during the last rape, or I should say after the last rape, this girl, this victim, 15-year-old girl, took a knife off the bedstand and stabbed Mr. Zachary Brooks 30 times, killing him. She has pled guilty to manslaughter, and now both the police department and the prosecution, they are on record for believing unequivocally that she was kidnapped, trafficked, raped, pimped out, plied with drugs. She used drugs. She maintained a drug-induced state during these rapes. I mean, it was animalistic what these two gentlemen were involved in with this young lady. She took matters into her own hand and stabbed one to death and got away. Now, that, in my opinion, should be the end of it. However, certain laws in Des Moines, Iowa, or the state of Iowa, make it, I don't know, impossible to not charge her. I don't quite understand even the reason for her being charged. But the prosecution did charge, stating that the fact that she stabbed him while he was sleeping and defenseless and not in the process of harming her was the reason for the prosecution. Now, having been on the other side of cases like this, where we determined the crime, and we would not make the arrest in this situation, even in a manslaughter, unless we were ordered to by our superiors. But mostly in a case like this, if the victim wasn't a flight risk, and in this case she wasn't, perhaps because she was a runaway and didn't have a permanent residence, that might have been an issue. But she should have been maybe fostered out or something, even though she just stabbed the guy 30 times. So I understand there were some issues here, but to actually, in our case, if as the investigators or the police officers responding to the scene, we probably would what we call submit for prosecution. We would write up the report and submit the report to the DA's office and let them determine whether or not to charge this person. Now, if that may have required us arresting her and putting her in juvenile detention during that period of time, if for any other reason her safety, but also the safety of others, that probably would have been the case. It was the case here. She was taken into custody and put into juvenile detention. I would be shocked. I know in Phoenix she would not have been charged, regardless of the fact that he was sleeping and defenseless. When you take the totality of the events, being plied with drugs, even if she used the drugs willingly, if they were supplied to her, she was held against her will in an apartment. She was raped repeatedly by that person, who then pimped her out to a friend / neighbor who raped her repeatedly for a week before this happened. So when you take in the totality of the events, even if she were to exaggerate some of these, I guess it's possible that she was willing to exchange sex for a place to stay, and that she was willing to be pimped out with the neighbor in exchange for sex, exchanging her sex for drugs or food or maybe even money, although there's no stating in the report of any of that happening. Both the police and the prosecution make it clear that they believe she was held against her will, raped numerous times by two men, and eventually killed in an attempt to escape. That's the totality of the events. So here she is charged with murder and pleads guilty to manslaughter. But the kicker, and what drew my attention to this in the first place, is the fact that they ordered her to pay $150,000 to the family of the person she killed, the rapist. Now, according to the judge and according to the prosecution, restitution is mandatory under Iowa state law. Well, that has to change. Here she's going to have a $150,000 fine placed against her, and I don't know much about restitution. I'm not sure if it's, taxed or if there is interest building, but if interest does build, it's going to be $1.5 million in short order. Chances of a now 17-year-old female with this background of drugs and being a sex slave, being victimized, and probably no high school education at this point, and so forth. The chances of her making any real money in her life is slim to none, okay? So it's not likely she's ever going to pay this off. But the problem is, it's always going to be with her. And it'll prevent her from getting basic credit, ever owning a house, ever buying a decent car, in these situations. So we're perpetuating this poverty and this, this anti-police, anti-prosecution, anti-law feeling by this unjust punishment for a rapist, a dead rapist. His family should not be entitled to anything. In fact, his family should be forced to pay court fees, not the other way around. So this is just one of those cases that caught my eye, and something that I have problems with. Now, other people may not have an issue with it. And, that's this world is made up of different opinions. But if I were to see this, and I had any possible power to change it, I would. It's a sad situation, and as well as I do, this occurs thousands of times across the country, mostly with people of color. In this case, all the people were African American, and they should not be ignored or tossed away based on that alone. This girl did everything she could to survive, and she calls herself a survivor, and she should be rewarded for that. Did she get the ball rolling by running away? Yes. Kids run away all the time. I ran away once or twice when I was growing up. We all, that's what kids do. They rebel, they run away. In this case, at least she had the foresight to stay inside an apartment complex, and obviously made the wrong choice in accepting, a roof over her head with a 28-year-old man, and probably not understanding or realizing in her young mind, uneducated mind, the dangers of doing such. Okay, so that's it for this episode 2 podcast. And if you have any questions or any comments, feel free to share them. And if you have any suggestions for other news articles that are hitting the airwaves now regarding law and order in this country, anything that may highlight some wrongdoing on the police officer's part or the investigator's part or the law, that's really what this podcast is about. I'm not here to undermine law enforcement in any stretch of the imagination. I support law enforcement 150%. But there are times when we have to, point out the uncomfortables. And that'll do it for this episode, and we'll talk to you soon. Have a good day.